Hey guys, I have the absolute pleasure of sitting down with Sheever to talk about interviews, which you have done a lot of. You've been a caster, an analyst, host, panelist, and an interviewer.
Everything under the sun.
Everything, but yes. I think interviewing is the one that kind of peeks into everything, little bits of it.
I guess interviewing is the one that kind of is involved with every different thing that you have. It's all about talking, and interviewing is really about how you talk to someone. So yeah, it's kind of related to every other thing you mentioned. Yeah.
So when we talk about interviews, we kind of come to them differently, right? We either come with a lot of prep or we just jump into them wildly. Where do you kind of fit into it?
I find I started out when I did interviews not doing any prep because I was at that point I was more like a play-by-play commentator. You always talk with your co-commentator, so you always know like questions to ask and you're just talking about the game. So that was kind of random. And as I grew more into interviewing, I was more also interviewing not just about Dota but about a person. So then I started preparing questions and preparing topics. But I think I started also preparing like full sentenced questions, which was not a good thing. Because when you have the sentence in your head and you miss one word, it just sounds stupid and it doesn't work anymore. So I think now I've evolved to the point where I'll have topics, but not necessarily questions. I just know where I want to go and how I want to segue into things. But yeah, that's how I do research normally.
Because interviews are very personal for each person, right? And I found personally, when you're trying to read off of your notes, if they're long and complicated, you'll falter, and you're also not listening if you have the questions already in your mind, right?
Yes.
You have a goal or destination, but you don't necessarily need those questions to get there.
Yeah, and it's sometimes also more interesting to get the follow-up questions rather than, if you have a question prepared and you're already reading the next question, that means that you can't really get a follow-up question because you're not hearing the answer properly, and maybe the answer is not entirely what you were looking for, and then you kind of have to ask a follow-up question. So to do that, you kind of have to already have in your head what you want to talk about.
Exactly. And when you talked about having a goal or destination in mind, I have to backtrack and ask what got you into interviewing to start with.
Nothing specifically other than being asked if I wanted to do interviews.
Oh, really?
Because I was a play-by-play commentator for Go To Gamers, and at some point they're like during TI2, right before, I think 3 weeks before TI2, they're like, oh yeah, we kind of need an interviewer for TI2. Are you able to make it? Sure. So then I started interviewing people. So that was kind of my get into interviewing.
And so you've gone from interviewing to panelist to hosting. What are some of the highlight reels from you just doing interviews? Which ones like stand out to you?
Okay, my standout interview that I personally really enjoyed was an interview with Dendi at DAC 2015. It was in China, and it was a period where Navi wasn't really doing too well. And I have a tendency to, before I do an interview, depending on what type of interview it is, but generally I'll ask like, is there anything specific that you want to talk about? Because you're kind of providing also a platform for the player to have their say. And normally people don't have anything, like they just want to get out of there, right? They just want to play some more Dota. But this time, Denny was really like, well, I kind of want to talk about the fans and our performance. I'm like, okay, sure, I give him the questions, and he was super open about how his team had been performing and how the public view, because everybody was like, there were so many fans for Navi and they're very harsh. They were very harsh when Navi wasn't doing well, and they weren't doing well a lot. So they were just he was very open about that, and that was definitely one of my better ones. Yeah.
So it sounds like when players are more honest and open, those are when you really start to connect more.
Yes. Yeah. Because there's sometimes you do interviews and you can tell that players just want to get out. That's understandable too, because they didn't sign up to be a media spokesperson. They signed up to be a Dota 2 player, and I think there's a lot of players that underestimate or undervalue the importance of interviews and how they come across to the public, like to create a fan base and all that. So I wish that was different, but it also makes me understand that they don't necessarily want to take a lot of time to answer a lot of the questions that, for all I know, 5 people before me asked as well, right? and you always try to get something different and have new information and have like an interesting interview, but you don't know exactly what they said in the interview that just had 15 minutes ago.
And so speaking of those 5 questions that they get asked over and over, how do you avoid not doing that?
Well, I try to, well, you can always look into interviews that they've already done way before. So I try to, when I know I'm interviewing an event, I try to listen to all the interviews, watch all the interviews that they've done in the year before, or sometimes if I had, depending on the time available, I'll try to dive in it a lot more. And that kind of avoids me from like I can just say like, okay, a year ago you said that, and then I can continue on off of what they said then, which makes it more interesting and creates more of a storyline throughout a period of time. And I think that is the main thing, is it's preparation, really.
Prep. Okay, and as an interviewee, what have been some of the highlights for you? Like, what interviews have you been on the other side that you've really enjoyed?
Well, I actually can't recall. Like they're blending together a lot. I'm gonna say that. I don't know. I feel like the bad ones stand out more than the good ones, and that is not negative for the good ones. It is more like you get asked like those 5 questions. You get asked those a lot, and those are the ones that stick in your head. So it's nice and refreshing when you don't get those 5 questions, but they don't necessarily still stick out. If that makes sense.
That makes sense.
I guess one of my highlighted ones, I think TA4 Hotbit was doing interviews, and he's always fun to be interviewed by because he just, I don't know, it can go around anything. He's one that doesn't do a lot of prep, but he doesn't need to because he just sits down and he comes up with the most weird topics, and he'll talk about literally anything under the sun, and that's always entertaining.
So for aspiring journalists or hosts or panelists, what advice do you have for conducting good interviews or prepping for an interview?
I feel like interviewing is one of those things that you can practice before you do things for an event and on camera and something like that. And I think that practice is key. You can't just say, hey, I'm an interviewer, I could interview people, and then hope that someone gives you a shot. And then when that somebody gives you a shot, you know, over a broadcast of a full day, you're probably gonna have 2 minutes per interview perhaps. You're gonna have maybe 8 minutes to 10 minutes screen time. And that is really difficult to have an impression like, oh, that person did really good. I really like that person interviewing, and we want to invite her or him or her back. And I think that you can practice so that those 10 minutes that you do have, that you're gonna nail it. And that's, that's my advice that I would give. Make sure you're prepared for when those 10 minutes come around, that you're not going to disappoint. And there's so many people that are online that you can already contact and interview, and you don't necessarily have to instantly go to Odie Pixel and Toby One and all the big names. You can start out with tier 2 talent, tier 2 players. They're normally very open to doing interviews because they like to get some recognition, and you can already make a name for yourself interviewing if that is indeed the way you want to go.
Amazing. Well, thank you for taking the time during my to sit down with me.
No problem.
I'm sure everyone at home is going to learn a lot about interviewing.
Hope so.
And anything in the future you're looking forward to?
Some
plugs you'd like to put in?
At the moment, I don't have any plugs. When is it going to be released?
Next week?
Next
days?
week?
Yeah.
Well, then I'm looking very much forward to DreamHack Rotterdam.
Amazing.
Yes, because
yeah.
it's coming to my country, so I'm very excited for that.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure we can all find you on the webs. You're at Sheever on Twitter.
Sheever Gaming everywhere.
Amazing.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for the time.
Thank you.